In the shadow of Queens Baisley Park projects, Aisha Johnson lives a life defined by equations, not of poverty, but of pure logic that only she can solve. At 15, her mathematical genius earns her a scholarship to the elite Rutherford Institute, where she is immediately tested by a professor who challenges the class with an unsolved Millennium Prize Problem. Her effortless, groundbreaking solution doesn't just earn her an A+. It sets her on a collision course with privilege and ambition, launching her journey from the hardship of the city to the hallowed halls of the Hartwirt Institute, where the fate of modern mathematics awaits her. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Aisha Johnson was 15, but her mind was a quasar, spinning at intergalactic speeds. Her world was Baisley Park Houses, a dilapidated, peeling paint public housing project in Queens, New York. In this neighborhood, life was often as cruel and irreducible as a multiplication table. Poverty equals lack of opportunity. Aisha's family were the unsolvable variables in this equation. Her mother, Clara, worked part-time as a janitor at a public school. Her hands were calloused from wiping and scrubbing, but her eyes shone with a persistent, flickering hope. Her father, David, was a day laborer on construction sites. His strong back often ached, but he always found the energy to smile when looking over Aisha's notebooks. Their home was a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor, with walls that were once bright white but now yellowed and stained. Though the room was narrow and the furniture old, it was Aisha's sanctuary, the laboratory where she solved the mind's most complex equations. The walls were not covered with pop culture posters, but with hand-drawn graph paper, solutions to differential equations, and tables listing thousands of digits of /pi. With her dark skin, brown eyes, and a perpetually slight frown, Aisha always looked more serious, more profound than her peers. Aisha's childhood did not unfold like that of the other kids in the neighborhood, who played street basketball or listened to high-tempo rap music. She would sit for hours, poring over algebraic variations in books borrowed from the local library. By the age of 8, she was grappling with advanced high school algebra problems that even 17-year-olds in the neighborhood couldn't grasp. When she was 8, she asked for a second-hand book on Fourier analysis instead of a doll for her birthday. This made her slightly odd, a bit of a mystery among her peers. Her only friend in the neighborhood was Hector, who, like her, was quiet and bookish. Hector was 2 years older and dreamed of becoming an engineer. Together, they would sit at the back tables of the library, discussing the social and economic inequalities that plagued their world. Hector would seethe with anger at the injustice in the neighborhood, but Aisha's perspective was different. "Hector," she would say, pointing to the solution of a problem with her finger, "the world is a giant set of problems. We need to understand every variable, every inequality, and every rule. Anger is not a solution, it's just a variable. The solution is knowledge and logic." Hector would shake his head. "That's easy for you to say, Aisha. You're a machine that constantly produces solutions in your head. But my mom works 10 hours a day in that filthy laundromat, and her only solution is falling asleep from exhaustion." Aisha would reply, her voice clear and determined. "That's why my solutions have to be big. They have to change the variables not just in my life but in your mom's life too. This is the most important equation I solve every day." Time flew by. By the time she was 15, Aisha's mathematical abilities were no longer a secret known only to her family and the librarians. Her local middle school math teachers didn't know what to do with her. She rapidly progressed beyond the curriculum, solving problems that her teachers struggled with, sometimes not even knowing the correct terminology. Once, in a high school level class, when her teacher accidentally erased a complex trigonometric identity problem on the board, she not only rewrote it from memory but also showed 3 other methods of solution. This talent became a chance beyond the narrow confines of her neighborhood. Her mother, Clara, found a brochure while working late one night, "Equality in Education, Scholarship Program." The brochure belonged to the Rutherford Institute, one of Manhattan's most prestigious schools, which educated the nation's most successful scientists and business leaders. Gaining admission to Rutherford was as difficult as traveling from Baisley Park to Mars. However, Rutherford offered an annual Genius Scholarship. This scholarship was an opportunity that covered full tuition, living expenses, and books for one brilliant, disadvantaged student. Aisha shone in every stage of the scholarship application process. She passed the standardized tests with the highest scores. During her interview, the professors asked her, "Can you tell us about the most difficult problem in your life?" Aisha answered, with the shadows of her neighborhood in her eyes. "The most difficult problem is the multiplication of a child's potential by the opportunities they are given. If the opportunities are close to zero, the result will also be close to zero no matter how brilliant they are. My goal is to be a random variable that will take this multiplication from zero to infinity." This answer deeply impressed the scholarship committee. A few weeks later, a shiny, sealed envelope arrived at their fourth-floor apartment in Paisley Park. The letter inside caused her mother, Clara, to scream and her father, David, to weep with joy. Aisha Johnson, at the age of 15, had been accepted to the Rutherford Institute on a full scholarship from Paisley Park houses. This was the first step in solving the equation. When the new school year began, Aisha wore the only new set of clothes her family's savings could afford. The magnificent, Gothic architecture of Rutherford was the exact opposite of the dilapidated structure she was used to. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and students everywhere, armed with expensive clothes and self-assured attitudes, the shield of wealth. Aisha suddenly felt as though she had found herself on an unknown spaceship among aliens speaking an unfamiliar language. Everyone seemed to be at a party she wasn't invited to, and she had come to the wrong address. Students were talking about their families' yachts and vacation homes. Aisha's only possession was her old backpack, and inside it, a thick book on number theory and geometry that she believed would change her life. The first few days were an adjustment problem for Aisha. She kept herself quiet, lonely, and unnoticed, until she entered the first advanced mathematics class. The class was taught by Dr. Elias Thorne. Dr. Thorne was a legend at Rutherford, brilliant, disciplined, cold, and one of the world's leading mathematicians. A man in his 50s with messy hair and tired eyes that sparkled with intelligence. The classroom was filled with 120 students. Everyone was curiously scrutinizing Aisha, knowing she was the scholarship student. Dr. Thorne walked to the front of the blackboard with a piece of chalk in his hand. He looked at the students over his glasses, took a deep breath, and spoke in a gravelly voice. "Good morning, future engineers, financiers, and mathematicians. My name is Dr. Thorne. In this class, I will not just teach you mathematics. I will not teach you the impossible because there is no such thing as impossible. I will teach you the yet to be solved." Then he turned to the large black blackboard. He wrote a few lines of complex algebraic expressions. Symbols, Greek letters, and exponential notations formed a pattern that danced together. The class fell silent. This was far beyond any high school curriculum. The problem involved Euler's totient function, one of the most challenging areas of number theory, and finding its sum was considered a significant achievement even in the mathematical world. Dr. Thorne slowly placed the chalk on the desk and turned to the class with a wry smile. "This is a problem I have been working on for years, but have yet to find the complete solution for. I wanted to share it with you. If even one person in this class can show me an approximate value of this sum with proof, I will automatically grant that student an A+ in the course, and my respect for them will be as infinite as the buildings of this institution." A gasp, mixed with surprise and fear, spread through the class. Students' faces were filled with panic and confusion. They all bowed their heads to their notebooks, but saw only blankness and complexity. Dr. Thorne walked slowly through the class, and, as I expected, expression on his face. "It seems the solution to this problem is..." Before he could finish his sentence, a hesitant yet determined hand rose from the back of the classroom. It was Aisha Johnson's hand. Her dark skin contrasted with her white shirt, and the expression on her face at that moment had wiped away all doubt, poverty, and fear. There was only pure, focused intelligence. Dr. Thorne stopped. He peered over his glasses. Was there a student offering to solve such a complex problem in the first seconds of the lesson? "Yes, you," Dr. Thorne said, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Is there a problem, friend?" Aisha stood up. Her voice was like a single note piercing the silence. "No, Dr. Thorne. I believe I can solve the problem." All 120 students in the class held their breath and stared at Aisha. Some snickered, others frowned with a look of derision. Who was this new scholarship girl? Dr. Thorne's surprise turned into a momentary frown. His face took on an icy seriousness. "Johnson, isn't it? That's quite a bold statement. Come to the board." Aisha walked to the board with calm, determined steps. She held the chalk, took a deep breath, and began this moment of her journey, stretching from Paisley Park houses to the center of Manhattan's most prestigious school, from the shadow of poverty to the light of genius. In her heart, she knew this solution was not just a grade, but a key that would alleviate her mother's exhaustion and her father's burden back. She turned to the board. The chalk hit the board firmly, and the elegant dance of arithmetic began. Aisha's pen, chalk, began to fill the board with an unstoppable flow. Every step followed a perfect logical sequence. She masterfully used the Riemann zeta function \zeta s and the Euler product to advance toward the problem's solution. Dr. Thorne watched, first with surprise and then with growing admiration. This was not something a high school student could do. This was the work of a mathematical prodigy. In just a few minutes, Aisha had sketched the framework of the problem Dr. Thorne had spent years trying to solve. And this was just the beginning. This moment was the turning point in Aisha Johnson's life. This was not merely the start of her journey at Rutherford, but the first powerful step on the difficult, competitive, but ultimately rewarding path of science and genius that would lead her to the Hartwirt Institute. The chalk squeaked against the mammoth slate, a sound that, to Aisha, was the purest music in the world, the sound of logic carving its way through chaos. She stood before the 120 silent students and a stunned Dr. Elias Thorne, her focus absolute. The blackboard was rapidly transforming from a blank canvas into a tapestry of number theory. Aisha hadn't memorized the specific problem, \sum underscore 10 equals 1, caret, \empty, \frac, 1, \phi, n, caret 2, because no textbook would cover it at her level. She solved it by synthesis. Her genius lay in seeing deep connections between seemingly disparate mathematical fields. She recognized the structure, a summation involving Euler's totient function \phi, n. This immediately suggested a path through the Euler product formula and the properties of the Riemann zeta function \zeta s. She wrote with the precision of a master calligrapher. The product taken over all primes p was the key. She used the totient function's property \phi, p to the power of k, equals p to the power of kp caret 1, and substituted it into the terms. The expression simplified into a complicated product of geometric series for each prime p. This was where Dr. Thorne had gotten stuck for years. The geometric series did not simplify neatly. But Aisha saw an approximation method, a way to factor the terms to isolate the simpler zeta function expressions. Her next move was a subtle manipulation, a trick of factorization that hinged on the prime structure. She used the identity 1 \frac 1 p squared, which is \frac 1 \zeta 2, in product form, as a base, manipulating the terms to fit this pattern. The final, elegant form appeared. The first part, \frac \zeta 2, caret 2 \zeta 3, \zeta 6, was a known result from a similar problem which she instantly recalled and applied. The remaining product was a small corrective factor. Aisha put the chalk down. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the exhilaration of the solved problem. The entire class, including the snooty students who had initially laughed, was dead silent. They weren't looking at a blackboard, they were looking at a feat of intellectual acrobatics. Dr. Thorne slowly walked to the board. He didn't speak. He examined the final line, then traced back through step 3, then step 2. He paused at the crucial factorization in step 3, his finger running over the chalk lines. He pulled a thick, dog-eared notebook from his briefcase, flipped through it, and compared his own years-old attempts to the fresh, confident lines on the board. The approach was different, more aggressive, and undeniably correct. He turned to the class. His face, usually a mask of weary detachment, was transformed. His eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. In all my years at the Rutherford Institute, Dr. Thorne's voice was softer than usual. I have never witnessed a first-day student, a high school student, demonstrate such a command of analytic number theory. This is an extraordinary piece of work. The convergence is proven, and the sum is expressed in its most rigorous form. He looked directly at Aisha. Johnson. That factor in step 3. It's a subtle application of multiplicative function theory. Where did you encounter that identity? Aisha shifted slightly, her small frame contrasting with the immense power of her mind. Sir, I didn't encounter it. When I saw that the standard approach led to a non-converging series of fractions, I needed a multiplier that could simplify the denominators. I derived it from the need to express the terms in terms of \left, 1 \frac, 1 p to the power of s, \right, -1, to link back to the zeta function. She hadn't read it. She had created it. Dr. Thorne removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and then let out a soundless breath. He walked back to the desk, picked up a pen and pointedly wrote a large A+, next to Aisha Johnson's name on his roster. "Class," he announced, his voice regaining its authority, "Ms. Johnson has earned the highest possible grade in this course before the first assignment has been issued. I suggest you all learn from her ability to think outside the known theorems." He then looked at Aisha and added in a near whisper audible only to her, "See me after class, Johnson." The dismissal bell rang, shattering the tension. Students erupted into whispers, many glancing at Aisha with a new, complex mix of awe, curiosity, and resentment. Aisha stayed put, calmly gathering her worn books. When the room finally cleared, only she and Dr. Thorne remained. The professor leaned against his desk, the fatigue having returned to his eyes. "Tell me, Johnson, where are you from?" "Baisley Park Houses, Queens, sir," she replied simply. "Yes, the scholarship file mentioned that. And your background? It's not in the private school circuit. Where did you learn this?" He gestured to the board, still covered in her elegant equations. "The local public library. And the university's free online lecture series, when I could get an hour on a borrowed laptop. Most of it, though, is from simply working the problems. The theory comes from the practice, not the other way around." Dr. Thorne nodded slowly, studying her as if she were a complicated proof herself. He wasn't seeing a poor black girl from the projects. He was seeing a pure, raw, and astonishing intellect. "The Hartwirt Institute," he stated, naming the most prestigious research institute in the world for theoretical mathematics and physics, "is where I received my doctorate. Their admissions committee is always looking for unorthodox genius. Talent that hasn't been laundered through prep schools and private tutors." He straightened up. "Johnson, I'm going to be honest. Most students here are exceptional but predictable. You are an anomaly. Your mind functions at a level that will not be challenged by my standard curriculum. I gave this class that problem today to establish a baseline, to weed out the overconfident. You, however, have rewritten the baseline." He pulled out a slim leather-bound volume from a locked drawer. Its pages were yellowed and dense with handwritten notes. "This is the Millennium Prize Problems Compendium. 7 problems, each worth $1 million for a solution. They are the keys to the kingdom of modern mathematics. Your official assignments will still be the required Rutherford curriculum, which you will complete flawlessly. But your real assignment, your new personal curriculum with me, will be to study the theory behind one of these problems, the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture." Aisha's eyes widened. The Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture was about the number of rational points on elliptic curves. It was esoteric, profound, and utterly bewildering. "Sir, that's impossible?" "Don't use that word," Dr. Thorne cut in, a hint of a smile finally cracking his stern face. "It's only yet to be solved. Your focus will be on the underlying number theory and algebraic geometry. I will give you reading material. I will supervise your work. But you will do the heavy lifting." He placed the compendium on the desk. "The Rutherford Institute has given you a chance for a new life, a new trajectory. I'm offering you an accelerator. I will mentor you rigorously. In return, you will bring that singular, ferocious intelligence to every problem I set before you. If you continue on this path, Hartwirt won't be a dream, Johnson. It will be an inevitability." Aisha looked at the heavy book, then at the professor, who was now her reluctant champion. The wealth and privilege of Rutherford still felt like a world away, but now, a bridge had been built. A bridge made of complex numbers and pure logic. Her journey had a new, terrifying, and exhilarating destination. "Yes, Dr. Thorne," Aisha replied, picking up the compendium. Its weight felt significant, heavier than her whole backpack of used textbooks. "I accept." As she walked out of the classroom, the marble halls no longer felt so imposing. They were just geometry. The wealthy students no longer felt so intimidating. They were just variables. Aisha Johnson had found her place in the equation, and she was ready to solve the world. The second problem, the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, now sat like $1 million beacon in Aisha's mind. But dealing with the social dynamics of Rutherford, and a mounting challenge from a competitive rival, would prove to be a different kind of equation altogether. The leather-bound Millennium Prize Problems compendium felt cold and heavy in Aisha's hands. It wasn't just a book, it was a gauntlet thrown down by the elite of the mathematical world. The bus ride back to Baisley Park that evening was silent. She didn't open the book, instead choosing to gaze out the window at the rapid transition from the towering, polished steel of Manhattan to the worn, low-slung brick of Queens. The distance felt less like miles and more like an astronomical unit. The problem Dr. Thorne had assigned, the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, BSD, concerned the properties of elliptic curves and their relation to L functions. It was an interdisciplinary monster, demanding mastery of algebraic geometry, complex analysis, and advanced number theory. For a high school student, it was utterly ludicrous. But for Aisha, it was a worthy challenge. The new curriculum. Aisha's life immediately settled into a rigorous new routine. The standard Rutherford classes were almost insulting in their simplicity. She completed the required homework in minutes, often while waiting for the train or her mother to finish her shift. The real work began after midnight. Dr. Thorne had provided her with a private reading list, texts on modular forms, p-adic analysis, and the foundational papers of Andrew Wiles. She devoured them. Her small desk in the Baisley Park apartment became a war zone of scratch paper. The BSD conjecture wasn't about finding a single number, but about proving that the rank of an elliptic curve could be determined by the order of vanishing of its L function at a specific point. This required an entirely different level of abstraction than her earlier work. She wasn't dealing with simple arithmetic series, she was charting points on highly complex geometric structures, trying to find a pattern in their rational solutions. She found herself talking to the equations out loud, walking the few steps of their apartment, mapping the curves in her mind. If the curve has infinite rational points, she murmured one night, her mother asleep just a curtain away, then the L function must have an infinite number of coefficients that conspire to force a zero at s equals 1. It was a beautiful, almost philosophical problem, linking the continuous world of complex analysis to the discrete world of number theory. The Rutherford ecosystem. While Aisha's academic world was accelerating, her social world at Rutherford was proving to be a challenge. The students, recognizing her instant celebrity after the blackboard incident, reacted in two ways: avoidance or open hostility. The avoidance came from the majority, who saw her as an inaccessible genius, a math robot, who didn't speak their language of designer clothes and Hamptons weekends. The hostility came from the top tier, the students whose carefully cultivated perfection she had suddenly eclipsed. The chief variable in this hostile equation was a student named Julian Vance. Julian was the embodiment of Rutherford privilege, handsome, impeccably dressed, and the scion of a major investment banking family. He was a mathematical Olympiad veteran, expected to be the top student in Dr. Thorne's class. Julian didn't just excel, he expected to be the best. Aisha's sudden, spectacular entrance had shattered his narrative. He saw her not as a fellow genius but as an intruder, a variable that needed to be normalized or better yet, eliminated. Julian's approach was subtle, laced with intellectual arrogance. In the days following the first class, whenever Aisha tried to sit alone in the Rutherford library, Julian and his clique would, accidentally, take the surrounding tables. One afternoon, Julian approached her table, ostensibly to discuss a different, mundane calculus problem. "Johnson," Julian said, leaning over her, his voice a smooth, calculated drawl. "That Toshan problem Dr. Thorne gave us. Fascinating application of the Euler product. Though," he paused, tapping a manicured finger on her worn BSD compendium, "using that known result \frac \zeta 2, caret 2 \zeta 3, \zeta 6. It's a clever shortcut, but one could argue it avoids the hard combinatorial work. Still, for a quick solution, impressive." It was a veiled attack. He was implying her solution was plagiarized or, at best, a lucky guess based on prior knowledge, not a true derivation. Aisha didn't look up from her notes. She was tracing an elliptic curve diagram. "The derivation is implicit in the factorization of the infinite product, Vance. If you trace the p-adic coefficients, the \zeta function terms emerge naturally. My approach was a synthesis, not a shortcut." She finally looked up, her dark eyes steady. I assume you have moved beyond high school calculus. What is your current area of research, Vance? I'd be happy to discuss the modularity theorem with you. The modularity theorem, which provided the key link between elliptic curves and modular forms, and was the foundation for Wiles's proof of Fermat's last theorem, was leagues beyond Julian's current scope. His smile faltered. I am focusing on stochastic processes in financial modeling, he stammered, pivoting to his family's domain. Far more practical applications than these archaic conjectures. Mathematics is the language of the universe, Vance, Aisha countered, returning to her book. If you only speak the language of money, you will only understand a small fraction of the world's problems. Julian walked away, his face rigid with suppressed fury. He hadn't won. He had, in fact, been soundly defeated in a purely intellectual exchange. From that moment, Julian Vance stopped seeing Aisha as a novelty and started seeing her as a primary competitive threat. The professor's challenge. The following week, Aisha had her first private session with Dr. Thorne. It was held in his sparsely furnished, book-lined office. The air smelled of old paper and dust. Tell me what you found on the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, Johnson, Dr. Thorne demanded, without preamble. Aisha placed her notes on his desk. The main difficulty is that the L function LES is only defined for s greater than 3/2. The conjecture requires its value at s equals 1. This necessitates analytic continuation, which brings us to the functional equation. She rapidly summarized her week of study. The functional equation links LES to LE2S via a factor involving the conductor n of the elliptic curve. This confirms that LES is entire, meaning it can be extended to the entire complex plane. The key is the rank, the number of independent rational points. For the L function to vanish at s equals 1, it must be forced to do so by a property inherent to the curve structure. Dr. Thorne listened intently, his fingers steepled under his chin. Very good. You've grasped the core challenge. Now let's talk tools. To prove this, you need to understand the Heegner points approach, specifically the work of Goldfeld, Gross, and Zagier. They provided partial proof for curves of rank 0 and 1. He pushed a massive book across the table, a graduate-level text on algebraic number theory. Your next task is not to solve the BSD conjecture. It is to understand the tools that have been used to partially solve it. Specifically, master the theory of elliptic curves over the rational numbers \math q, and the concept of Tate-Shafarevich groups, the group of obstructions. We call them the Shah group, denoted \text 3. He pointed to the symbol \text 3. This term, the Shah group, is the hardest to calculate. It's the measure of how close a curve is to satisfying the Hasse principle. This is the heart of the problem, Johnson. You need to develop a geometric intuition for this seemingly algebraic quantity. He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. The competition here is fierce, and your rival, Julian Vance, is already looking for ways to undermine you. But they will never beat you here in the realm of pure thought. They have money, you have the mind. Focus on the L functions. They are your lifeline. Aisha nodded, the new challenge electrifying her. The BSD conjecture was no longer just a set of symbols. It was a vast landscape of interconnected mathematical ideas. It demanded all her focus, her ingenuity, and her relentless work ethic. She was no longer just the scholarship kid. She was Dr. Thorne's protege, tasked with tackling a problem that had baffled generations of mathematicians. Her journey to Hartwirt was not just about getting in, it was about proving she deserved to be among the people who would one day change the world. And the first necessary proof was not on the blackboard, but in the solitude of her mind, wrestling with the rank of an elliptic curve. The intense focus Aisha dedicated to the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, BSD, soon isolated her even further within the gleaming, privileged walls of the Rutherford Institute. Her peers saw her not as a student, but as an exotic, untouchable variable. Yet, she found a strange comfort in the intellectual rigor, where the rules were absolute and the answers were provably true, unlike the messy, unjust realities of Paisley Park. Dr. Thorne, true to his word, had become a demanding, if somewhat distant, mentor. Their weekly sessions were less instruction and more high-level intellectual sparring, forcing Aisha to justify every step of her reasoning. You speak of Tate-Shafarevich groups \text 3e as if they are abstract phantoms, he challenged her one day. But they are geometric entities, Johnson. They represent the obstructions to the local global principle. You must visualize the failure of a solution to globalize across the field \math q. Draw me the geometry of that failure. Aisha spent hours translating abstract algebraic concepts into visual curves and diagrams, forcing her mind to see the geometry of algebraic failure. It was challenging, but every small conceptual breakthrough was a powerful rush of affirmation. Julian's epsilon. While Aisha was grappling with the infinite complexity of BSD, Julian Vance was dealing with the finite, but no less vexing, problem of control. Aisha's presence was a blot on his perfect transcript and his perfect legacy. He needed to prove her success was a fluke, a single lucky shot, not sustained excellence. Julian, a finance prodigy, recognized that his strength lay not in pure mathematics, but in applied systems and manipulation. He could not beat Aisha in theory, so he would beat her in the game of Rutherford life. His opportunity arose with the announcement of the annual Rutherford Science and Technology Field Trip. Every year, the top 20 students across all science disciplines were selected for an exclusive, highly prestigious 5-day visit to a premier research facility. This year, the destination was the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study and, critically, a private session at the Hartwirt Enigma Lab. The trip was highly coveted, not just for the prestige, but because the Hartwirt session was known to be a direct, unofficial recruitment event. For Aisha, it was the only way she could ever afford to experience the environment that was her ultimate goal. Julian and his circle controlled the subtle levers of influence at Rutherford. They were excellent at manipulating the merit system. The selection for the trip was based on a combination of high grades, which Aisha had, strong extracurricular participation, which Aisha lacked, spending all her time on BSD, and a mandatory ethics and leadership seminar grade. Julian, seeing Aisha's singular focus on her secret curriculum, used this last variable. He engineered a situation in the ethics seminar where Aisha, in her fiercely logical manner, critiqued the professor's ambiguous example of white-collar financial ethics, using a precise, mathematical model of systemic fraud. Her purely intellectual critique was interpreted by Julian's friends who dominated the class as lack of empathy and poor team player attitude. A week before the selection announcement, Dr. Thorne called Aisha into his office. "Johnson, your grades are faultless. You have an A+ from me and straight A's in every other course, despite the fact you're barely attending them. However," Dr. Thorne sighed, gesturing to a form, "the field trip selection is in jeopardy." Aisha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Is it the extracurriculars, sir? I simply don't have the time." "It's Julian Vance," Dr. Thorne cut in, his voice sharp with frustration. "He and his cohort run the student council and the ethics committee. They've submitted a review of your seminar performance, citing antisocial tendencies and a failure to integrate the institute's values." He pushed the form toward her. The score was AB-, a calculated epsilon drop that, when combined with her lack of school clubs, would place her just outside the top 20, paving the way for one of Julian's allies. "This is arbitrary, sir. It's punitive for having an independent thought," Aisha argued, her voice trembling slightly with anger, the first sign of emotion she had shown at Rutherford. "It is the calculus of their control, Johnson. And you must learn to factor it into your equations. The world is not just pure mathematics. It is politics, and privilege is a powerful force." Dr. Thorne paused, his expression softening slightly. "However, the Dean of Sciences respects my judgment. I can use my influence for one student override. But you must give me a justification that overrides their ethical concerns and your lack of involvement." "What justification, sir?" "The mathematics colloquium is next Friday. Every top math student, including Julian, is required to present their current research. Julian, no doubt, will be presenting his stochastic model of credit default swaps, a topic designed to impress the financiers on the board." Dr. Thorne's gaze was penetrating. "You will present your work on the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture. Not the solution, Johnson. Just the conceptual framework and the challenges in proving the rank. You will demonstrate a mastery of mathematical thought that no other student in this building can touch. You will force them to recognize that your true contributions to the Institute are measured not in club meetings, but in intellectual power. It's graduate-level material, sir. I don't know if I can simplify it enough for a high school audience. You don't need to simplify it. You need to awe them. You need to show them the depth of your thinking. If you present this convincingly, I will personally guarantee your place on that trip. You will have to face Julian and the entire faculty. Preparing the proof of self. Aisha accepted the challenge instantly. The next few days were a blur of preparation. She knew the BSD was too complex to present using only formulas. She needed to make the abstract visible. She used the Rutherford Computer Lab, a space usually dedicated to trading simulations, to create elaborate visual models of elliptic curves and their rational points. She used color coding to represent the L function's behavior, visualizing how the curve's geometric structure dictated the order of the zero at s equals 1. She planned to present her findings without notes, relying only on the sheer clarity of her internal mapping. The night before the colloquium, Aisha was back in Baisley Park, hunched over her desk. Her father, David, came in, his back aching after a long shift, but his eyes full of paternal concern. "Still working, my little professor?" he asked gently. "It's a presentation tomorrow, Dad." "It's about a very big, very difficult problem," she said, tapping the BSD compendium. "If I do well, I get to go on a trip to the place where the greatest minds work." David looked at the dense, intimidating equations. "You know, when you were 8, you told me that mathematics was about finding the hidden rules that make things work. You said if you knew the rules, you could change the game." He knelt beside her. "I don't understand these curves, honey. But I understand you. And I know the only reason those rich kids are trying to stop you is because they are afraid. They're afraid you found a rule they didn't know about, a rule that says a girl from Baisley Park can be smarter than all their money." He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't just show them the math, Aisha. Show them the rule. Show them you are the rule." Aisha looked at her father, drawing strength from his simple, profound faith. She wasn't fighting for a grade or a trip anymore. She was fighting to prove that her worth was intrinsic, independent of the external variables of wealth and social status. She was fighting for the geometric failure of her life's trajectory to finally satisfy the Hasse principle. The stage is set. The following afternoon, the Rutherford Colloquium Hall was packed with faculty, administrators, and the entire student body of the advanced track. Julian Vance was already on stage, concluding his polished, PowerPoint-driven presentation on quantitative finance with a confident, slightly arrogant flourish. He received polite, enthusiastic applause. Then the dean introduced the final presenter. "And now we have a special presentation from one of our newest and most dedicated students, Aisha Johnson. She will be discussing a problem of a slightly more theoretical nature." Aisha walked onto the stage. She wore the same simple, well-worn clothes. She carried no notes, only the chalk. She stood next to the massive blackboard, facing Julian Vance, who was smirking slightly from the front row, already calculating her failure. She picked up the chalk. No greeting. No introduction. Just the sound of logic about to be unleashed. Her heart pounded, but her mind was utterly calm, focused only on the beautiful, brutal mathematics of elliptic curves. The stage was set for her to prove not just the rank of a curve, but her own unassailable place in the world. The silence in the Rutherford Colloquium Hall was absolute, thick with anticipation and the palpable tension radiating from the front row where Julian Vance sat, his posture rigid. Aisha Johnson stood alone on the stage, the stark black of the board behind her, her only companion the chalk in her hand. She didn't launch into complex formulas immediately. She began by painting a picture with words, translating the abstract into the intuitively geometric. "The Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture," Aisha began, her voice clear and carrying, "is not merely a test of algebra. It is a profound inquiry into the nature of patterns." She sketched a simple elliptic curve on the board. "Imagine this curve," she continued, gesturing to the smooth, elegant line. "It looks continuous, but we are only interested in the points where x and y are rational numbers, fractions. These rational points are the solutions to the equation." She then drew small, distinct dots along the curve representing these points. These points, P_1, P_2, P_3, form a group, a mathematical structure. The question is, how many independent rational points exist on this curve? This number is called the rank of the curve. It can be 0, 1, or even infinity. Determining this rank is the core of the problem. She paused, letting the simple visual sink in before introducing the complexity. The revolutionary part of the BSD conjecture is that it links this discrete geometric quantity, the rank, to a continuous analytic function, the L function of the curve. This function LES is like the curve's genetic code containing all its arithmetic information. Aisha moved to the second blackboard, where she quickly drew a graph representing the L function, showing it defined only to the right of s equals 3/2. We need to know what happens to this genetic code at the critical point, s equals 1. The conjecture states that the rank of the elliptic curve is exactly the order of the zero of the L function at s equals 1. She wrote the simplified conjecture again. The geometry of failure. Aisha then dove into the real challenge, the part that only a serious student of the problem would grasp. The Tate-Shafarevich group \text 3. Mathematicians have successfully used something called the Hasse principle to check for solutions locally, in the real numbers, in the p-adic numbers. We can see if a solution should exist everywhere. She drew a diagram showing local solutions, small circles, that failed to align into a global solution, a solid line. However, sometimes a curve appears to have solutions everywhere locally, yet a global rational solution fails to materialize. These missing solutions are measured by the mysterious \text 3 group. It's the obstruction group. It quantifies how often the Hasse principle fails. She pointed to the complex, full BSD formula. If the rank is 0, LE1 should be non-zero. If the rank is 1, LE1 has a simple 0. But if the rank is 2 or higher, the complexity of \text 3 becomes almost paralyzing. The group itself is only conjectured to be finite, and for almost all elliptic curves we don't know its size. It's the greatest unknown in the BSD equation. Aisha paused, making eye contact with the faculty. The challenge, therefore, is not just to prove the relationship, but to find a computational, structural link between the geometric properties of the curve and the algebraic complexity of the \text 3 group. It is, to my mind, the most beautiful, terrifying, and fundamentally human of the Millennium Problems, because it deals with the failure of perfect logic. She put down the chalk. She had spoken for 15 minutes, covering material that most of the faculty had only a passing familiarity with, and she had done it without a single note, relying only on her internal conceptual map. The attack. A wave of respectful applause broke out, led by Dr. Thorne, who was nodding slowly, a rare, genuine look of pride on his face. Aisha's performance was undeniable. It was a raw display of intellectual power that dwarfed Julian's polished financial presentation. Then came the cue. Julian Vance, his face pale with fury and calculation, immediately raised his hand. Dr. Thorne, knowing what was coming, gave Julian a stern look, but allowed the question. "Ms. Johnson," Julian began, his voice dripping with false concern, "that was an impressive summary of existing theorems. However, you mentioned the complexity of \text 3. Given that you are still in high school and the top experts in the world have been unable to calculate the size of \text 3 for rank 2 curves, could you perhaps share one original mathematical insight you've developed? Or is your entire research merely a recitation of Goldfeld and Gross-Zagier's work?" It was a direct, cynical attempt to expose her lack of professional academic status and her reliance on literature she had only recently studied. The faculty leaned forward, expecting Aisha to falter. Aisha met Julian's gaze. She wasn't angry, she was calculating. He had challenged her on her ability to generate original work. "Vance," Aisha replied calmly, "your question is perfectly logical but mathematically premature. One does not publish original work on a Millennium Prize problem after 2 weeks of study. However, I can offer an original structural hypothesis regarding the \text 3 group's relation to the curve's coefficients." She picked up the chalk again. The hall was silent. "As you know," she addressed Julian directly, "the size of the \text 3 group is related to the existence of certain p-adic solutions. My hypothesis focuses on the discriminate \delta of the curve, which is defined by A and B coefficients." She wrote quickly. "When the discriminate is extremely small relative to the curve's conductor n, that is, when \delta n to the power of k approaches 0 for some integer k, I hypothesize that the geometric structure becomes highly constrained. This constraint should force a direct, computable relationship between the first non-zero Taylor coefficient of LES at S equals 1 and the group \text 3 E, potentially simplifying the calculation. She turned back to Julian. I am currently testing this hypothesis by looking at curves with very small prime factors and their conductors. It's not a proof, Vance, but it is an original conjecture, an attempt to find a simpler rule in the face of immense complexity. The faculty began whispering, intrigued. The idea of linking the discriminate size to the complexity of the \text 3 group was a novel approach. It was a small, elegant idea that showed genuine, deep mathematical thought. Julian was left speechless, his calculated attack having backfired spectacularly. He had asked for originality and been given a viable, cutting-edge research hypothesis. The decision. Dr. Thorne rose, cutting off any further questions. He walked to the center of the stage, placing a firm hand on Aisha's shoulder, a rare public sign of mentorship. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," he announced to the hall. "Your presentation has proven beyond doubt the depth of your intellectual commitment to the Rutherford Institute. You have demonstrated leadership not by organizing events, but by challenging the very limits of human knowledge." He then looked pointedly at the Dean of Sciences, who was smiling broadly. "I believe Ms. Johnson has offered more than enough justification to override any administrative concerns regarding her seminar score. Her place on the Hartwirt Enigma Lab field trip is not just deserved, it is an imperative for the future of mathematical research." The applause this time was deafening, a victory not of wealth, but of intellect. Julian Vance, seeing his last barrier against Aisha's success crumble, slammed his notebook shut and stormed out of the hall. Aisha stood there, the chalk dust on her fingers feeling like the dust of a hard-won battle. She had neutralized Julian's variable and secured her place. Hartwirt was no longer an abstraction. In a week, she would be standing in the very halls of her deepest ambition. But she knew Julian Vance was not finished. He was not a mathematician who accepted defeat. He was a financier who always sought a way to short-sell his opponents. The journey from the worn red brick of Baisley Park to the manicured lawns and classical architecture of the Princeton Institute for Advanced Study was a geographical translation of Aisha's entire life. She sat on the charter bus, one of the 20 elite Rutherford students, staring out the window. Unlike the others who were excitedly discussing the upcoming networking opportunities, Aisha felt a singular focus, a deep reverence for the intellectual ground she was about to tread. The highlight of the trip was the private session at the Hartwirt Enigma Lab, an exclusive annex known for housing the world's most cutting-edge mathematical and theoretical physics research. This was her destination. Arrival at Hartwirt. The Enigma Lab was a study in minimalist modernity, glass, steel, and light. It smelled faintly of ozone and expensive coffee. Dr. Thorne, who was accompanying the group, led them into a large auditorium. The session began with a lecture by Dr. Lena Chen, a brilliant young Hartwirt researcher specializing in the topological analysis of high-dimensional data sets. The content was advanced, covering concepts like persistent homology and Mayer-Vietoris sequences, ideas far beyond the Rutherford curriculum. While most students, including Julian Vance, politely feigned understanding, Aisha was riveted, her pen flying across her notebook as she sketched the complex geometric relationships Dr. Chen described. During the break, while Julian was aggressively networking with Dr. Chen, Aisha approached the researcher with a question. "Dr. Chen," Aisha began, "when you apply persistent homology to a financial time series, how do you distinguish topological noise from the genuine low-dimensional manifold structure? Specifically, how do you handle non-stationary data where the persistence diagram might be influenced by a high-variance tail?" Dr. Chen stopped mid-sip of her coffee. Her eyes, initially detached, focused sharply on Aisha. "That's a very advanced question. You understand the limitations of a standard p-value in this context. Most analysts don't get that far. You're Johnson, right? Dr. Thorne's protege?" Aisha nodded. Dr. Chen spent the next 10 minutes discussing her work with Aisha, ignoring the rest of the Rutherford students. She was speaking to Aisha as a colleague, not a student. Julian, watching from a distance, saw the exchange and the look of genuine intellectual respect in Dr. Chen's eyes. The sight fueled his simmering resentment. The challenge data set. The climax of the visit was a practical challenge. The students were taken to a high-powered computing lab and presented with a complex, anonymized data set. This data set, Dr. Chin explained, contains years of atmospheric measurements and sensor readings from a high-altitude research balloon that was lost a decade ago. It's an intellectual puzzle. The challenge is to use mathematical modeling, differential equations, stochastic processes, or topological analysis to determine the most probable final location of the balloon, giving us a search radius. This was the practical test designed to assess analytical prowess under pressure. The students were given 3 hours. Julian immediately began setting up a complex, but standard Kalman filter model to predict the trajectory, a popular, proven method for noise reduction and state estimation. Aisha recognized the limitations of the Kalman filter here. The data contained too many variables and suffered from severe sensor drift in the final hours, a perfect case of nonlinearity. She knew she needed to apply her pure math insight. She decided to use a system of partial differential equations, PDEs, modeling atmospheric flow as a fluid dynamics problem and coupling it with the balloon's drag coefficient. This was riskier, demanding a much more complex set of initial conditions, but it promised a far more precise result if solved correctly. Aisha entered the initial data variables, wind speed, altitude change, temperature gradients, into her simulation environment. She was in the zone, her fingers flying across the keyboard, translating the complex fluid dynamics of the atmosphere into the elegant language of PDEs. The sabotage. Suddenly, Julian Vance walked past Aisha's workstation, pretending to check the clock. As he passed, he executed a swift, almost imperceptible maneuver. He reached out with his foot and gently but decisively pulled the surge protector plug halfway out of the wall, ensuring the power light stayed on, but the connection was critically unstable. A moment later, as Aisha was running a heavy computational iteration to solve the Navier-Stokes equation components of her model, the system hiccuped. The screen flickered and a cascade of error messages flooded the console. The session crashed. Aisha stared, momentarily paralyzed. 3 hours worth of code, initial conditions and iterative calculations were gone. The temporary files were corrupted beyond recovery. She had less than 30 minutes remaining. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. This wasn't just a lost assignment, this was her chance to shine at Hartwirt. She saw Julian glance back, his expression bland but his eyes holding a tiny malicious spark of triumph, the silent recognition of his successful short sell. The unwritten rule. Aisha took a deep, shaky breath. She didn't have time to rebuild the entire PDE model, which relied on hundreds of lines of complex code. She had to pivot. She had to use her pure, raw mathematical intelligence to bypass the computational failure. She closed her eyes for 10 seconds. What is the simplest, most fundamental rule of this problem? The final hours of data were chaotic, but the atmospheric dynamics dictated one immutable truth: conservation of energy and momentum. The balloon had to obey the geostrophic wind equation, the balance between the Coriolis force and the pressure gradient force. She reopened her eyes and grabbed a notebook. She ignored the computer entirely and began to work the final 20 minutes of data by hand. She took the initial, most reliable pressure and velocity readings from the last moments before the sensor drift became critical. She isolated the 3 most influential variables: the pressure gradient \nabla p, the air density \rho, and the Coriolis parameter f. Aisha performed rapid, high-precision estimations. She calculated the average Coriolis force for the latitude of the last known position. She calculated the effective pressure gradient from the final, semi-reliable sensor readings. She wasn't building a full-blown simulation. She was using a fundamental principle to perform a first-order, hand-calculated approximation. She calculated the final velocity vector, v, and projected it forward for the last 30 minutes, using the known terminal velocity of the balloon at its estimated altitude. The result wasn't a complex map. It was a single, precise set of coordinates and an estimated error radius. She scrawled the numbers onto a submission card and handed it to Dr. Chen with 2 minutes to spare. Julian submitted his Kalman filter result with a confident flourish. His coordinates placed the balloon in a wide 5-mile search circle. The verdict? Dr. Chen returned an hour later with the results. She looked at the group, her face unreadable. "Julian Vance," she said. "Your Kalman filter model was technically sound. It predicted a large search area, 5 miles in diameter, centered on the coordinates 40.521 /circ/text n, 74.008 /circ/text w. A solid, conventional effort. Julian beamed with triumph. He glanced at Aisha, ready to enjoy her failure. However, Dr. Chen continued, turning to Aisha. Ms. Johnson, you submitted your answer on a note card with hand calculations based on a geostrophic approximation. No computer model. No fancy graphics. The room was silent. Julian looked smug. The real location of the balloon was determined years ago through recovered wreckage, Dr. Chen revealed. The balloon was found exactly at 40.523 /circ/text n, 74.004 /circ/text w eta. She looked straight at Aisha. Your hand-calculated geostrophic estimation was 40.522 /circ/text n, 74.005 /circ/text w. Your model was simpler, faster, and your prediction was over 80% more accurate than the next closest result. Dr. Chen paused, smiling. It seems that when your computer failed, Ms. Johnson, you simply loaded the entire atmosphere into your head and solved the differential equations yourself. That, students, is a level of pure analytical genius that no software can match. Julian's smug expression dissolved into disbelief and cold fury. Aisha had not only overcome his sabotage, but her raw intellect had yielded a better result than his meticulously coded, but conventional system. Dr. Thorne walked up to Aisha and handed her a small leather-bound notebook. A gift from the Hartwirt Enigma lab. You didn't need the computer, Johnson, he said, his voice full of respect. You needed the rule. And you found it. The Hartwirt experience solidified Aisha's path. The institution now knew her name, not just as a scholarship statistic, but as a mathematical force. Her journey to the pinnacle of academia was accelerating, but she knew her quiet war with Julian Vance had just entered a more dangerous, high-stakes phase. Aisha's stunning victory at the Hartwirt Enigma Lab, a triumph of pure thought over sabotage and computation, cemented her status as the singular mathematical mind at the Rutherford Institute. Dr. Thorne was overtly proud, and the faculty now treated her with a deference previously reserved for visiting academics. Julian Vance, however, vanished from her immediate orbit, retreating to the shadows to calculate his next move. The silence was more unnerving than his overt hostility. The return to Queens. Despite her academic acceleration, Aisha never forgot the foundation of her life. She was acutely aware that her success was an exception, not a new rule for Paisley Park. Her frequent late-night trips back to Queens were less about resting and more about grounding herself. One damp Saturday afternoon, Aisha returned home to find a crisis brewing. Her father, David, had collapsed at a construction site due to a severe back injury exacerbated by years of heavy lifting. He was in the local emergency room. Aisha rushed to the hospital, a stark, underfunded facility that was the antithesis of the pristine medical centers the Rutherford families used. She found her mother, Clara, sitting beside David's bed, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. The doctor says it's a slip disc, Aisha, Clara whispered, her voice heavy. He needs surgery, maybe fusion. They want to transfer him to a specialized facility, but... She trailed off, avoiding eye contact. But what, Mom? The insurance is denying the full cost, honey. They're calling it a pre-existing condition because of old injuries. They'll cover the basic stabilization here, but the specialized place, the one Dr. Chen at Hartwirt mentioned, would cost us everything we don't have. They want $50,000 up front. Aisha felt the old equation of her life, poverty equals lack of opportunity, slam back into sharp focus. She had solved differential equations and untangled the logic of elliptic curves, but she was powerless against the brutal arithmetic of American healthcare. We will find a way, Mom, Aisha said, her voice firm, though she felt a cold dread in her stomach. Julian's proposal. A few days later, back at Rutherford, Julian Vance finally reappeared. He intercepted Aisha in the library stacks, his demeanor polished, his expression carefully calibrated to convey concern, not rivalry. Aisha, I heard about your father. I'm truly sorry, Julian said, his voice measured. My father's firm, Vance Capital, does a lot of work in healthcare sector analysis. I know how quickly things can escalate. Aisha was immediately suspicious. Julian never offered empathy without an agenda. "What do you want, Vance?" Julian ignored the bluntness. "I want to propose a solution." He pulled out a contract draft from his briefcase. "My father is a major donor to the Rutherford Endowment and has extensive connections at the best hospitals. I can arrange for your father's immediate transfer and guarantee the full surgical coverage. $50,000, no questions asked, no repayment necessary. It would be entirely handled as a medical grant through a private foundation." Aisha's breath hitched. It was a lifeline, a clean, immediate solution to a life-threatening problem. But the terms of the contract made her blood run cold. "In exchange," Julian continued, his eyes finally showing the gleam of calculation, "you will sign an agreement to be my mathematical consultant for the next 5 years. You will assist me exclusively with all my university coursework and competition problems. And, crucially, you will formally withdraw your application to the Hartwirt Institute." Aisha stared at him. "You want to buy my future?" "I want to partner with it," Julian corrected smoothly. "Look, Aisha, you're a genius, but you're too naive for the real world. Hartwirt is for theorists. You belong in a firm like Vance Capital, where your mind can make real money and real change. I'm offering you the money to save your father and a guaranteed high six-figure salary after college. You get financial freedom, I get your intellectual firepower. It's a perfect zero-sum game." The temptation was agonizing. Her father's health was the variable she could not afford to risk. But signing meant signing away her dream, her identity, and the pure pursuit of knowledge. It meant validating Julian's belief that her worth could be quantified and controlled by money. "I need time to think," Aisha whispered, clutching the contract. The Hartwirt letter. Aisha went straight to Dr. Thorne's office. She needed counsel not on the mathematics of the BSD conjecture, but on the morality of the Baisley-Park equation. As she entered, Dr. Thorne was holding a distinctive, thick envelope bearing the Hartwirt Institute seal. His face, however, was grave. "Johnson," he said, "before you say anything, I have news. This arrived this morning. The Hartwirt Admissions Committee has issued a highly unusual invitation." He pushed the envelope across the desk. It wasn't a rejection or an acceptance. It was an invitation to a special pre-admissions colloquium next month. A final, intense interview and evaluation for only 2 high school students worldwide. Aisha's heart soared, but the elation was immediately crushed by the weight of Julian's contract. "Sir, I have a problem. My father needs surgery and I was just presented with a way to pay for it, but the price is Hartwirt." She quickly explained Julian's proposal, handing Dr. Thorne the contract. Dr. Thorne read the document, his features hardening into an expression of cold rage. He slammed the contract down. "This is classic Vance manipulation. A calculated financial derivative on your life. He is trying to isolate the singularity, your mind, and harness its power." "But, sir, my father," Aisha pleaded, tears finally pooling in her eyes. "He needs the 50,000. I don't have a week to fundraise." Dr. Thorne took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I know. The variables are stacked against you. But you must not sign this. Giving up Hartwirt is giving up your unique purpose." He looked at the Hartwirt envelope, then at the Julian's contract and finally at Aisha, his voice dropping to a decisive whisper. "Johnson, I have $200,000 in a research account that has been dormant for years. I will personally transfer the $50,000 to the hospital today. You will consider it a non-repayable research grant from me, to be paid forward when you are an established professor." Aisha was stunned into silence. It was an act of loyalty and faith that transcended mentorship. Dr. Thorne picked up the Hartwirt letter. "Now this is your focus. The colloquium is next month. It's a highly competitive challenge problem, the final test. If you are successful, you are in. You must go, Aisha. Not just for you, but to prove that the Vance equation, that talent must bow to money, is mathematically false." Aisha felt a rush of profound gratitude and fierce resolve. The debt to her father was solved and her path was clear. She picked up the Hartwirt invitation, her eyes fixed on the seal. She knew her acceptance at the Hartwirt Institute would be the ultimate proof that her inherent value, her pure intellect, was the most powerful asset of all. She now had 1 month to prepare for the final, greatest test of her life. And Julian Vance would be waiting for her failure. Aisha's final month at the Rutherford Institute was a period of intense, singular focus, shadowed by the silent menace of Julian Vance. Dr. Thorne's generosity, the $50,000 research grant, had saved David Johnson's life, securing him specialized surgery and giving Aisha a priceless gift: peace of mind. She now owed Dr. Thorne more than just success. She owed him the complete vindication of his faith in her. Julian, his grand scheme thwarted, now focused his energy entirely on the upcoming Hartwirt pre-admissions colloquium. He was the only other student from Rutherford invited. He had calculated that if he could not control Aisha, he would ensure her public intellectual defeat at the highest level, thereby securing his own spot and destroying her credibility. The Hartwirt Colloquium Challenge. The colloquium was held on a frosty December morning at the Hartwirt Institute campus. It was a small, brutally intense affair. A few professors, Dr. Thorne, Aisha, Julian, and one other candidate, a quiet, formidable student from Beijing. The final test was a 3-hour written examination consisting of a single, formidable problem. The problem, presented by Dr. Lena Chin, was known as the prime gap distribution problem. It required the students to analyze a modified, bounded form of the twin prime conjecture. This wasn't an open Millennium Prize problem, but it was designed to test the same core skills: the ability to deploy analytic number theory, modular arithmetic, and the rigorous use of asymptotic analysis, like the sieve method, under extreme pressure. Julian Vance, relying on his training, immediately began applying sophisticated versions of the Bruns sieve method, aiming for a highly complex, yet conventional, proof by bounding the number of pairs. He was fast, precise, and systematic. Aisha, however, recognized the trap. The problem's unusual constraints, p\1\mod 4, and p+2 dividing the sum of divisors \sigma p, made the sieve approach too slow and prone to compounding errors. She saw the constraints not as obstacles but as shortcuts. Aisha's solution: the modular shortcut. Aisha realized the problem hinged on congruences and the esoteric properties of the sum of divisors function, \sigma n. Constraint 1. p\1\mod 4. This was straightforward modular arithmetic, defining the prime's form. Constraint 2. p+2 divides \sigma p. This was the key. Since p is prime, \sigma p equals p+1. The condition simplified to p+2 must divide p+1. Aisha wrote this fundamental simplification on her scratch pad. Therefore, p+2 must divide -1. The only integers that divide -1 are 1 and -1. The rigorous, arithmetical structure of the constraints, when fully simplified, led to an arithmetic contradiction for positive primes. Aisha looked up from her paper. Julian was still furiously scribbling, lost in a complex sieve bound that would take pages to complete. He was solving the complex, secondary part of the problem, missing the fundamental zero solution hidden in the structure. Aisha formalized her proof in less than 30 minutes. The solution was elegant, brief, and brutally conclusive. The asymptotic density of such prime pairs is 0. The set is empty. She placed her pen down and waited the remaining 2.5 hours, rereading her proof to ensure no modular trickery had escaped her. The verdict? When the time was called, Dr. Chen collected the papers. Julian's submission was a thick packet of dense, intricate calculations, a masterpiece of analytic technique, but based on a flawed premise that such primes even existed. Aisha's paper was a single sheet of lucid, definitive algebra. The judging committee, Dr. Thorne and 2 Hartwirt senior fellows, retired to evaluate the papers. The discussion was swift. Julian's paper was an excellent display of effort but fundamentally incorrect. Aisha's was a stunning display of mathematical insight, the ability to identify the simplest, most powerful reduction in a seemingly complex problem. Dr. Thorne returned to the room, his eyes shining with profound pride. He stood beside Dr. Chen. "Candidates," Dr. Chen announced, her voice filled with respect. The prime gap distribution problem was designed to test 2 things: computational rigor and algebraic intuition. Mr. Vance, your rigorous application of the sieve method was impressive, but you failed to recognize the immediate, simple reduction in the problem's constraints. Your answer is incorrect. Julian, whose confidence had been absolute moments earlier, slumped in his chair, his face a mask of shock and defeat. Dr. Thorne stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, you did not use the sieve method. You did not engage in complex asymptotic estimation. You looked at the constraints, applied the fundamental definition of the sigma, p, function, and demonstrated with elegant clarity that the set of such primes is empty. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression of warmth. Your solution is not just correct, it is the most efficient and powerful proof possible. You bypassed the complexity and isolated the simple, core truth. That is the definition of genius. Dr. Chin turned to Aisha. The Hartwirt Institute values original insight above all. We are pleased to offer you immediate, full admission as an undergraduate research fellow, effective next fall. You have earned the title of Hartwirt Scholar. Aisha closed her eyes, a rush of emotion washing over her. It wasn't just an acceptance, it was the definitive public validation of everything she had worked for, a complete reversal of the Baisley Park equation. Julian Vance watched as Aisha's destiny unfolded, realizing he had been fundamentally outmatched. His final, calculated effort to control her future had failed. He was a master of the finance game, she was a master of the universal rules themselves. Aisha walked out of the Hartwirt campus, no longer just a scholarship kid, but an accepted Hartwirt scholar. She called her mother, Clara, whose delighted sobs were the sweetest sound in the world. She then looked down at the simple, well-worn shoes that had carried her from the cracked pavements of Queens to the hallowed grounds of Hartwirt. Her journey had just begun. The pursuit of the Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture and the vast, unsolved mysteries of mathematics awaited her. The girl from Baisley Park, the mathematical prodigy, was now where she belonged, on the front lines of discovery. The final equation had been solved. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.